Well, hello, everyone. Jeff will be joining us in just a moment. We
Hey,
have some, here's Jeff. So I just want to welcome everyone. I'm Charles Vinnick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Whale Sanctuary Project, and want to welcome you to this, really what Jeff and I are calling a conversation about our experiences with the reintroduction of Keiko to the wild. And so there are some 450, 460 people who have registered for this conversation, this webinar. So we welcome all of you, and we're pleased to be able to spend a little time talking about our experiences with Caico. So just as a little background for how I came into the story, I joined really as Caico was being transported to Iceland. And so I was in then as the kind of manager of the overall project from that point forward, but Jeff preceded me by quite a long time in that. So he'll be talking broader about his experience as well. But I think what both of us feel, and what so many people who were involved with the Caico project feel, is that it's been a big part of our lives. It has in so many ways influenced not only the work we're now doing with the Sanctuary Project, but the work we do in the wild with animals anywhere, and the way in which we think about animals. So with that, let me just turn it over to Jeff, and he can certainly introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a crazy time right now, and everybody is probably a little concerned about where we're going to go in the future. But hopefully, with our little chat between Charles and I, we can tell you a little bit about some exciting things that we experienced in the past. My experience, I started in the captive industry and started out very young, at 15 years of age, and then started the transition to the Caico project gradually after about 20 years, and was tasked with the job of going out and trying to find a place to locate Caico when he was going to be ultimately moved, and to help with the conditioning and preparing him for the rigors of the wild. So that was kind of my role in the Caico project, and he was an amazing animal. It'd be fun to talk about it, just dust off some old memories and share them with everybody.
So just a few housekeeping things. What Jeff and I are going to do is present some observations from our experience, show some video clips, show some photographs about the reintroduction program. That'll be roughly a half hour. Then we'll open it up to questions. So you should see a Q&A box at the lower part of your screen. Open that. You can write your questions to us. We'll try to see them. Now, be patient with both of us. We're a little older. We're not as technically savvy as many of you. And I think this is COVID 101 for all of us. I joked that I've changed my middle name to Zoom. And so we're dealing with all of these kinds of technology things. So there may well be some issues as well. Now, I know a number of our colleagues who have worked on the project with us are signed up, are registered. So I just want to give a shout out to some of them: Michael Parks, Elise Dufour, Howie Garrett, Kelly Balcom, and others. Also want to mention that some of the people who are active with the Whale Sanctuary Project on our board of directors were instrumental in the Caico project. Dave Phillips was originally the director of the Free Willy Caico Foundation that then merged, that Jean-Michel and I were doing when I took over that role. Naomi Rose, who is on the board of the Whale Center Project, in all of the research as well as the work for all of the reintroduction program. And of course, my friend and colleague, Joe. So I want to shout out to him. And Jeff, if you could bring up the team picture we've got as well.
Absolutely.
So here's a picture of the team, and I think there are a couple interesting things about this, but the main reason we bring it up is obviously these are friends and colleagues and really special people for all of us, but they're not all here. This was part of the team because we never had the full team at any one time in Iceland once we brought Caico over. But the other thing that's really interesting about this picture, aside from its great fun, is what does it show? It's showing a whale who is used to performing actually doing a performance behavior in order to get the picture. And that's part of what is the dynamic about this whole story, that we're dealing with a whale who was, frankly, a movie star, as well as a performer, who we're bringing back to the wild and helping learn some of those behaviors in order to go wild. So that's part of what this story is about. And also want to mention that, you know, a couple of the people who were really part of this story are no longer with us. And so in that sense, certainly Steve Clausen, we remember well and care greatly about, and I want to mention him particularly because he's no longer with us. So with that, Jeff, I think we can move team picture, but I just want to mention that, you know, any one of those people and many others could be sitting here with us doing exactly the same conversation. It just happens to be Jeff and me, but and we're pleased to do it. But we all have memories of this experience that are our own, and some share and some don't. We all come at it from our own experience and our own perspective, and we'll try to share some. Kick this off with maybe the first video.
All right. And like Charles says, this is a huge team. And it was a team from all over the world that we pulled together to do this project. But we had players that were for like the kids and everything that were extremely helpful in this whole campaign. Okay, I'm still trying to do the. Okay. Let's see. Not very good at this, so please bear with me.
So here you see Free Willy, the film in 1993. And of course, in the film, Free Willy jumped to freedom. But in reality, he had never left Reno Aventura, the park in Mexico City where he was performing daily, a small tank, not much deeper than he was long. And in fact, this video, little jumpy, it's some of the other footage, early footage. You can see the papilloma virus that he had on his fin, on his fluke. And so that really was part of the pressure that he was under there. And it was the children from around the world who saw Free Willy movie, who wrote letters and sent cards to Warner Brothers and to the Humane Society of the US, and urged that something be done to really save Caico. And that's what pushed this whole project forward, brought the huge financial support that made it possible, and enabled us to actually begin a project moving Caico to Newport, Oregon. So Jeff, you can describe a little bit about what you were doing there.
Yeah. So I joined the team once Caico was brought to Newport. And one of the things we were trying to do initially was to develop a relationship with them. It's so important to develop a relationship and trust. And that was so important for Caico because we were going to ask him to do something that had never been done before. You know, we're going to transport him halfway across the world and then try to put him back into the wild. And so this is an animal that was lethargic and just didn't move around very much. He was in a very small pool. The pool was so small that his fluke would rest on the bottom and it became flat over time. And normally a killer whale's fluke is curved. And so he had a lot of changes that we had to do, and including live fish training. He was very naive about eating fish. He was used to being hand fed. With a handful of fish, we just dump into his mouth. And if we dropped a fish and it sunk by the side of his head, he'd let it go. So we actually had to train him for him to recognize live fish as a food source. And that was tricky, you know. And so there was a lot of things that you don't see that were taking place in preparation for his move to Iceland. But it's like conditioning an athlete. You need to get the physical conditioning going. He'd been lethargic for many, many years, you know, and then try to prepare him for the wild, just like training an Olympic athlete. So
when he was in Newport, how much weight did he gain in the 2 years that you were working with him there?
It was close to 1,000 pounds, actually a little bit more. So and it was really interesting with him was we took him from Mexico and brought him to Newport, and he hadn't had an underwater viewing in Mexico. So when we put him in the Newport facility, he was really curious about the people in the underwater viewing. So he spent a lot of his time just parked at the window, just watching, because that's normally what we do. It's down in Mexico, was we just park in the service and watch people go by. But then he had in Newport, he had all the people. So then we had to get him to the point where he would lose interest in the people, so we could condition him to start moving around the pool a lot more. And that was just it was kind of the start of the conditioning process. And it was a long process to get him ready for the transport.
And then one of the things that had to happen in order for that transport to be possible was a panel of veterinarians had to come in and evaluate his health. And that also is one of the things that informs us as we go forward with the Whale Sanctuary Project, because we will have the same kinds of panels of veterinarians evaluating the health of any candidate for a whale sanctuary. And that's what had to happen for Keiko as well, so that people felt he was healthy enough for the transport and that he didn't have any remaining virus that could infect wild species as well. So those panelists approved him going. And then one of the funny things is we had to get permission from the government in some way to move him. And so the question was, well, where's his passport? Is he Mexican? Is he American because he's in Oregon? So we actually ended up having to go to Congress and give a presentation in Congress as well about what an important whale he was and how important this was for the country for him to be, quote, exported to Iceland. So those are just some of the fun things that happened as well. So Jeff, why don't we show up some things about the reintroduction, about the transport from Oregon going over to Iceland.
All right, let's see here. Okay, again, I apologize for being slow at this. So this is Caico. As Charles said, there's a lot of preparation work going into this. And one of the things we had to do was to condition him to go into to a stretcher, to get familiar with the med pool. We wanted, again, it was all about trust. He needed to trust us when we put him in situations that he wasn't in before. And he did. And that was one of the things that was remarkable about Caico, was he was such a great animal. He was an animal that responded very well to people, and he wanted to please. And that was, I think, because he'd been in such a difficult situation for so long. You know, he'd been in a small pool with dolphins that could maneuver a lot better than he could. So he was kind of bottom of the pecking order. So when we got him to Iceland, it was really nice. He had his own pool. He taught him to swim and to be stronger, and we were moving in the right direction. And then Charles, you want to take it onto the transport?
Sure. So what we're doing, and this was the first time that the U.S. Air Force had ever leased a transport plane, a C-17, the largest transport plane they had at the time, to a private group. So they leased it to our organization for the transport. And we needed this plane because it was able to take off on a short runway and land on a short runway. So this is the pool that he was in. And of course, he's in freshwater. They won't let you put salt water in a plane because of the potential for corrosion. But because we had to take off light, we immediately air-to-air refueled over the western US, flew to the eastern US, air-to-air refueled again, so we could only have enough fuel to again land light on the small island off the coast of Iceland, which would be Caico's home. And here we are landing, and we had a little break of the landing gear on the way down, Jeff jumping out of the way of some chains that were breaking from holding things in. We all held our breaths there, and the plane was actually brought to a stop in very short order. And that landing gear problem actually had nothing to do with Caico or the weight. People always ask us, well, was that because of the weight of Caico? No. This was a light load. We can probably start to stop the screen share there, Jeff. Okay. But it was a light load for that plane. We had a big crowd of people. We had UPS involved taking Keiko to the plane. We had to sign the UPS bill of lading. We had the same UPS pick us up in Iceland and then transport Keiko down to his new home in Kletsvik Bay on the island of Espenair. So it was an exciting transport. It was important to get Keiko out of salt water into the fresh water and back to salt water as quickly as possible. And the whole transport, if I remember correctly, I think was around 17 hours, start to finish, for him to be back in salt water, which was really important. You may have noticed he had some white coloring on him there in the little tank that he was in the plastic big bathtub. That was really A&D ointment that was spread all over him to keep him moist in fresh water. So again, those are the kinds of things that Jeff knows so well, being kind of the transport expert in the group, about what you have to do to maintain the health and well-being of the animal while in what is a very stressful circumstance for the whale or any whale or dolphin being transported.
Yeah, that's why that trust was so, yeah, that's why that trust was so important. And it was a crazy landing too. That when we landed, we heard this big pop, and again, the chain popped and everything, and we wondered what the heck was going on, because it wasn't a normal landing. And already the winds were blowing 40 miles an hour, and our cutoff was 40 miles an hour. And the pilot thought he could bring it in, and he did an amazing job doing it. But it was the landing gear that failed on us and caused over $1 million worth of damage to the C-17.
Closed the airport for about 3 days, so a number of people who'd flown in other planes couldn't leave.
Yeah,
we were all okay.
Yeah, other people, they thought that there was close to almost 1 billion people watching the transport worldwide. There was he had that much interest, and people were just fascinated with the story.
So let's shift over to the video on the Bay Pen and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Tell me about the feature of the Bay Pen.
The overall length of the Bay Pen is 250 feet long. It's 100 feet wide, 25 feet deep. So it's approximately about 60% bigger than the pool he's in right now. It's going to be about almost 4 million gallons.
Now, now figure the pool is the size of a football stadium. So this is massive, and to ship this all over to Iceland was a huge event. So we had to charter an Antonov airplane, the largest airplane in the world, and load that up and then ship it to Iceland. And then we had 20-some trucks that met the plane in Reykjavik and then brought them over on the ferry to the Westman Islands. We constructed the pin on shore and then moved it out. And this is nothing like this has been done of this magnitude before. And so we were developing new technologies. We had an incredible marine ops team that worked day and night to put the pen in place and make sure it was safe for Keiko when we arrived. So while we were doing all the preparation work in Iceland for Keiko, the conditioning and getting him used to eating live fish, we had another team in Iceland that was preparing the pen and getting it ready. And so it was as I say, it was a huge number of people that were involved in this project, and all of them doing integral parts and all of them really important parts. And we're just a small part of the team. But there's a lot of people that deserve the credit and never got it.
So here you're seeing this is the first day as Keiko is being released from that sling that he was in from the airport down to the bay, and his first swim in a pool this size ever from the time he was first captured at the age of 2.
Yeah, and right here, and what we're doing, and so once we got him into the pen, we got him used to the pen, and then we started, again with the conditioning. We had to maintain that conditioning, but we wanted to get him moving around the pen. So what we're doing is we're using slingshots to be able to launch fish out into the enclosure initially, and then gradually out into the bay when we expanded our footprint from the sea pen into the netted off bay, and started with the boat walks. So the boat walks, again, there's so much preparation that goes into getting the animal to the point where he will do what you ask him, and it's all about trust and developing that really good rapport. And Keiko was, again, such a good animal and such a great animal to work with. He always wanted to please, and so getting him out there and getting him, you know, in a new environment for the first time ever, it was so stimulating for him. And I think that's the thing that was most remarkable to us and the people working with him daily was that the changes that we saw in him. His dorsal fin started to come up a little bit. His strength became stronger. In Mexico, his skin was so mushy and soft, and you could tell he just wasn't thriving. He was doing really poorly. And in the video that we showed, you know, you don't see the roller coaster in the background, and you know, at Ventura, where Caico's pool was in Mexico, and you don't see that. And there's so many stressors on him, but we didn't want to make it stressful for him when he got him to Iceland. But you're not going to be able to get around all of it. You know, some of the stuff we can't prepare him for, like the first moment in the pool, and that we didn't know what to expect. And he went out and did a lap around the pool and did another lap around the pool, and then came over to us and kind of like, wow, this is really cool, you know. And it was just such a huge relief because the transport was over, and there's between the plane breaking down and lots of other things that were involved behind the scenes. It was, you know, it was really nice to finally get him home.
And so we started with the bay pen, just as you saw in those images. And then that first year, it was really focused around keeping him comfortable in the bay pen, getting his strength up, getting him used to it, dealing with ourselves, getting used to all of that work. And then we installed the net, 800-meter net across the bay, so he had access to the bay as well. And then Jeff and the team working with Caico had to create a way for a gate in the bay pen, and Caico go through the gate, be able to have access to the whole bay before we began to take him out further. So as Jeff mentioned, there's a marine ops team that's doing all the work on that, cleaning the nets regularly so the water continues to flow. We had a little house on the bay pen because we had to access that solely by water. There was no land access to working with Caico. So we're coming by boat all the time. So all of that is part of the logistics of managing a project like this with our focus completely on the whale. So Jeff, I think we've got some other pictures to show about some of those challenges we had along the way.
All right. Well, one of our biggest challenges is we're in Iceland, and Iceland is the second windiest country in the world. And, you know, and no matter how many times you read that or how many times you've experienced the weather, you just have never seen anything like this until you've been sitting out on a bay pen or out in a boat trying to track the whale. The conditions were unbelievable. And the first year we were there, we had a year and a half we were there, we had over 100 hurricane force winds. So that's winds of 74 miles an hour or faster. At 120 miles an hour, our wind gauges would blow off. At 140, it would literally flag you at the bay pen. But we would be out there and we'd be working in these conditions. We'd be oftentimes in the water with Keiko. Keiko loved it. We didn't know, you know, we were hanging on for dear life.
Keiko doesn't care. Keiko's kind of happy with this. He'll come up out of the water, open his mouth and take a spray. He can swim in it. For the people, it's tough duty. It's not tough duty for Keiko.
So in that first year, while we were there, we had storms like that. And actually, we arrived, I think it was September 9th of 1998. And by the 18th of September, we had a storm like that. And it tore apart parts of the bay pen. The medical lift that had been specially designed and built in the bay pen, so Caico could be raised up in shallower water, and the medical team could deal with him and do the kinds of assessments of his health they needed to do. That medical lift was destroyed. And so we never had the medical lift again. And so we had all kinds of maintenance issues to deal with because of those storms. But what no one had told us was that those are normal. I mean, this was not an uncommon experience. It's a bay that's well protected inside a harbor, but with winds from a certain direction, those winds swirl around the cliffs and increase in velocity. So that was just one of the challenges that you learn to deal with in Iceland. And basically we had the summer months every year to deal with going out with Caico. So along about mid-May, the weather would be clear enough. The wild whales are coming back from their migrations, Norway to Iceland. And then we have that period until mid to late August to be going out and doing work with the whale. And then we're dealing with winter and darkness for much of the rest of the year. And the team was all a team from mostly the US, but also some Europe, some Icelandic. And they're on 30-day and 45-day shifts. So on for 45 days, off for 30 days. And there's always that movement of people back and forth because they had lives to live, they have families to go to and the like, and that's part of the process. So Jeff, let's talk a little bit about some of these open ocean walks. People always said that you're...
You know, I've been around these animals for a long time, and I've been really lucky to work with them, and they're incredible animals. But to be able to take a whale for a walk, that was something special. Let me share this one. It was the preparation work. Again, it takes a lot of time and a lot of, you know, just a lot of fortitude to get him to the point where he was ready to go. But again, Keiko rose to the occasion. This is one of our first walks. Training to go through a gate is you know, difficult to do. It's not something that they like to do. They don't like to swim under things. This target pull that we're using here, that's just to get him going, because that's something he's familiar with. We want to keep things around him that he's familiar with and keep him excited about it. And that's get him thinking. That was the biggest challenge with Keiko. He'd been in Mexico for so long, and he kind of stopped, he'd shut down. He just did keep forward, and that was about it. But to get him thinking and trying to work things out for himself, it was fun to watch, and just watching it, he just loved being out in the open ocean, and he just thrived, and it was such a fun thing. This is Stephen and I doing a walk. We'd have to coordinate. We had a number of different boats out there, as well as a helicopter, and we would coordinate all the boats and position Keiko in a way when we came across wild whales. We'd bring them out there, and then we would go neutral with the boat. So Keiko could listen to the whales and get used to it and get familiar with the surroundings. And he just needed to have enough confidence in his surroundings. And once he had that, we exposed him to the wild whales. And he started, you know, getting braver and braver because they were so foreign to him. He had been in a captive situation for a long time. He hadn't been with another killer whale or orca and in many, many years. And you know, so this was, again, all new and all very exciting for him. You can also see on this shot here, there's 2 tags on him. We have a TDR tag, which records how deep he's diving and the speed he's traveling, as well as a location tag. And Keiko had a very unique dorsal fin, but with the research that we were doing out there, there was other animals out there that had similar dorsal fins, but been on one direction or the other.
Yeah, people always said that only in captivity you see them with bent dorsal fins, but in fact, you see a few in the wild. It's common in captivity among males, but uncommon but occasional in the wild.
Yes, exactly. And that's likely from trauma or, you know, some kind of sickness in the past. But we'd take them out, and then again, gradually got closer and closer, and we had numerous physical encounters with wild whales. And he'd be curious. He didn't know what to expect. And then the thing that was really interesting to me was that we had a number of different groups in the area. And that was one of the things we had to do, is trying to figure out who was out there, which animal belonged to which group, and trying to figure all that out was pretty complicated, and then try to expose him to which group we thought would be the best candidates for him to be accepted by. And so we'd take him out there and get him used to it. And sometimes he would take off and he'd go the other way, you know. Sometimes the wild whales would take off and run away. Sometimes they'd be curious and they'd interact for just a few seconds and then they'd spread. But each time he gained more confidence. And here you can see just some of the conditions that you're out there in. And this is summer months. And so the winter is much more harsh than this. And to conduct research or try to have walks, taking Keiko out for walks throughout the year, it was almost impossible other than the summer months. And even the summer, every 3 or 4 days, we get weather like this.
And you can imagine in waves like this, and you're in basically a small open boat, you're trying to look for wild whales because the goal is to be in proximity to the wild whales and see how they and Keiko interact. But first you have to find them. So we're 10, 12 miles offshore in a small boat looking for wild whales. And that in itself is a problem. But here you see an interaction where they get close and Keiko has some real interest in them. They have some interest in him, although not enough interest or not enough comfort that in any way do they stay together after this brief interaction.
And as I say, we had many encounters like this, and you could never predict what the behavior would be for Keiko or for the wild whales. And that was one of the things that was most challenging, you know, because we would have a group that we would think would be show a little aggression towards Keiko one moment, and then the next seemed to warm up to him. But I think it was just because he was kind of unfamiliar, you know, to the animals in the area. He was probably, you know, just a little naive to the wild, you know, compared to the wild whales. So, you know, he certainly, he rose to the you know, the occasion, and he did. He always did what we asked him to do.
And that ending of that video clip, the last picture you're seeing, where you see Keiko go swimming at his choice, if you will, toward the group of wild whales, and he comes right up, almost touching the wild whales, and then comes on back to Danielle, our boat. And that was a picture, the end of 2001. And what I observed, if you will, and Jeff can speak to it in his own way, is that each summer he would start basically where he left off the end of the last summer in terms of his level of comfort. And so it was a progression of getting more comfortable with each of these interactions or over the duration of a summer. And at the end of each summer, we had a decision to make of, do we continue through the winter where we can't do any of that work and again start again the next summer? And do we believe it's possible for Keiko to join wild whales or not? And Jeff and the team were looking for his family. He was captured in Iceland, which is why he was brought back there. And so there was DNA sampling of wild whales to see if we could find his family. We looked at some of the whales where the males had the bent dorsal fin. Were they family? We never did find a direct family connection. We did all kinds of listening with hydrophones to sounds and seeing if there were ways we could connect to any one group. So it was, just as Jeff's saying, a sequence and a progression of experiments that had never been done before to figure out whether it was possible for him to be comfortable enough to swim away. When we turn off the engines and he's not hearing us, would he stay with whales? Or if we turn back on the engine, would he follow us home? And that was always the dynamic that we're wrestling with in the process.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and that's such a challenge, you know. We taking him out there, and again, keeping that confidence around those wild whales that he wasn't familiar with, you know, was again challenging, and especially dealing with with the weather and everything. But we'd take him out for walks, and we'd do 60 miles and in a day, and he'd draft behind the boat doing 20 knots, and it was really magical. It was fun to see him out there and just how well he adapted to that environment and how he thrived in it. He really seemed to excel in the wild. It was really something to see.
Well, I know we are already a half hour in, and so I want to be sensitive to leaving enough time for questions, but we've got a couple more things we want to show you. So Jeff, let's go through a few of the pictures on the research,
right?
And then we'll try to get to questions very quickly as well.
Yeah, see here. Okay. Yeah, and so I guess, you know, what we learned from Keiko, there's a lot of things that we learned, and this, I guess, in some ways you kind of I look at it at least a bit like NASA in some ways. The technology that NASA's developed that is useful to the general public, you don't really hear about, and it's the same thing with the Keiko project. There was a lot of research that came out of there, and a lot of technical developments that we were able to contribute to the research community, and it was really fun, and so there was a lot that we learned, and starting with photo IDs. We needed to do photo IDs of these animals so we could identify the animals out there and then figure out which pods are there and where the movement, what those movement patterns were. And so that was extremely important. So photo ID was instrumental initially to getting to know the animals in the area. And from that, the photos that we did was kind of the keystone for the North Atlantic killer whale photo ID catalog. Another thing that we worked with was the TDRs, and this is with Dr. Robin Baird. We would place these suction cup tags on the wild whales so we'd have some comparisons to be able to know how deep they dive, how fast they swim, so that we could try to condition Caico to meet that criteria. I'll go through these kind of fast. One of the other things is that we studied lung capacity, and we developed new technologies to be able to monitor the health of the animal. And actually, this technology was used a few years later for Springer, which was a little animal that was here in the Northwest that was out of habitat that we returned back to the wild. So a lot of this stuff, you don't really see. But probably the most important thing that we contributed was tag development, to be able to come up with a tag that we could put on an animal in these difficult conditions and that would stay on the animal and not impact the animal's movement. And so with Caico, we knew that we needed to have a tag for Caico because we wanted to do this responsibly, and we wanted to do this in a way that was humanely, and we didn't want Caico to suffer. And if Caico swam off and didn't join a pod and was lost out at sea, we didn't want that. We wanted to make sure that we knew where he was, and that he that we always took care of him, and so the tags were really important. But this tag technology, it's gone from these larger tags that we started off with Caico to smaller tags that are being used today. And these smaller tags are giving us baseline information. It gives us movement patterns of these animals that around the world. And so that's something that was extremely important and a huge contribution to the research community. But there's many things that we learned. And Charles, you can say the most important thing we learned.
Well, I'll get to that in a minute as well. But one of the things I want to mention about Jeff, because if you're ever going to be in the wild with probably any animal in the ocean, but particularly whales, the guy with you is Jeff. And what I always remember about the tag sequences, it's not easy to put a tag on a whale. And Jeff would be in the water with one hand on Caico, keeping Caico calm, talking to Caico, working with the tag. And no matter how cold the water got, he wasn't wearing gloves because he couldn't do the work with gloves. His hands and his face are turning blue, and he's still in the water, no matter how long it takes. And that's the mark of a commitment and a talent that is just incredibly special. And he's the guy. And so, that's really also what he's doing with us with the Whale Sanctuary Project, what he'll do as we transport animals to come to a sanctuary. Because you need not only Jeff, but the rest of the team. But Jeff's skill and talent and sensitivity around an animal is pretty unique and very special. So let's go to that last video, and then we'll get to questions, as this takes us into the summer of 2002, when I think all of you know the story, or most of you do, where Caico actually, in a storm, left and went to Norway. But here we are, and what was unique about this summer is when we were late getting out, there were a lot of technical problems of getting out of the bay pen, out to the wild whales. But when we first took him out in July to the wild whales, there was a huge superpod of whales near the island, about 7-8 miles away, following a herring ball for food. And they stayed in the area for weeks, and Caico stayed with them the whole time. He didn't come back to us. But then in a storm in August, all the boats had to come in. We could hear him on the radio tag, and he actually took that 1,000-mile, 800-mile journey you saw in that last map from Iceland to Norway. He left with wild whales from everything we could tell. Those whales that were, I think we can end that image there, Jeff. We can end that video.
Yeah.
So you saw that map of the journey, and he left with wild whales. And of course, we went to look for him on that Monday. We could hear where he was again with the radio tag. And every morning we would get a satellite reading as to where he was. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, we'd know where he was. So the first day I got in a 2-engine plane to look for him. And again, we could hear him, but the slowest you can go at a 2-engine plane is about 60 knots. The waves were big. I never saw him. Then we went over to the Faroe Islands, and they offered to help us. We took a big transport helicopter out. We could hear him again, but we couldn't see him. But every day we could see where he was going, and we also got readings as to how deep he was diving. And some days he was diving very deeply. Was he feeding? Was he with wild whales? Everyone will have a different theory. And we don't know. We don't know how long he was on his own, how long he was with wild whales. What we do know is that the news got out that it was Keiko coming across toward Norway. And he was recognized by a fishing boat off the coast of Norway. They threw him some fish and he followed them home. And he went up a fjord. And in that fjord, there was no wild fish for him to eat. There were no herrings. There were no wild whales. And we sent people over to care for him there. And that was really the summer, the end of the summer, September of 2002. And then he was there in Norway, really coming and going on his own. There was no net enclosure, people there to care for him and feed him. And then in the winter of 2003, he caught a virus and he did die. So the question always is, was this successful or was it not? And what did we learn? So I think the one thing we learned is that we've always known how easy it is to capture a whale. What we learned is how hard it is to pull one back. And that's the piece I think that we all have to take away, because there will be other experiences. Jeff spoke about Springer, a very different set of circumstances that he and others were instrumental in returning her to the wild after briefly not being in the wild. She's now had 2 calves. She's with her family, and it's a tremendous success story. Taking a whale from 20 years or more in captivity back to the wild is a different challenge. And we have to look at those on a case-by-case basis and see what's possible. And so I think this was a remarkable experience. Caico, in my mind, had a higher quality of life than any other captive whale has ever been afforded in those 5 years of being in the wild, being out in the ocean. So quality of life, this was exceedingly successful from where I sit, from my experience. Were we successful in helping him join a pod and living with them forever? No. That part wasn't successful. So we have to, look at all of it and try to understand and learn from it. And each of the things Jeff has outlined, the technology, the husbandry, the equipment, the transport, all of these experiences and new approaches inform everything we do about selecting a site for a whale sanctuary, about how we'll work with the animals. Why have we selected Port Hilford? Partly because it's a community where our team can live. We've been in places that are very remote. There are remote places for a sanctuary, but a sanctuary has to be 25, 50 years of work, not a temporary activity. And I think part of what characterized our experience with Caico is everyone thought it was going to work right away. He'd see wild whales, he'd join them, he'd go, we'd all cheer, we'd all go home. It wasn't like that. And so it became a multi-year project when everyone thought it was temporary. And therefore, there are stresses on the people as well as on Keiko. So that's all part of the story. So Jeff, you may want to say a few other words, then we'll jump into some quick questions
All right.
before everyone leaves us.
I guess, Charles, you're right. I mean, I guess this is the reason why we need sanctuaries. Some of these animals are just not going to be able to be returned to the wild. And one of the things that we found with Keiko was that we learned over time was that we initially thought that there'd be a lot of instinctual behaviors that Keiko would have in the wild, that he would know how to hunt fish. He knew what a wild fish looked like, and he knew it was a food source, and how to socialize with the wild whales. That he had lost some of those skills, and that is something that we can't do. We can teach him to eat live fish, and we can teach him to hunt for live fish, but it's hard to tell him where the migratory patterns are of the fish and those kind of things. And that's something that he learns from his mother, or would have learned from his mother. So taking these animals, from the wild and put them into captivity, and then trying to bring them back is very, very challenging. It can be done. In certain cases, it certainly can be done. And cases like Lolita is a good example, and we've been working with the Lummi tribe and Orca Network and a number of other organizations to try to see if we can do this responsibly, and again, always in the best interest of the animal. And Lolita is a special case. We know her family. Her mom's still alive. We're in an area that we could work all year round. Yeah, maybe that she may be a candidate. Some of these other animals that have been bred in captivity, and they're hybrid between an Icelandic whale and a North Pacific whale, that wouldn't be responsible to try to return them back to the wild. So that's why the need for sanctuary is there, and it's overdue.
So there were a lot of questions about Lolita, and Jeff has just responded to a couple of those without perhaps even knowing it. Well, here's a question, Jeff, from Amanda. Why do you think he didn't become a danger to humans, as so many other captive whales have become dangers to humans like Tilikum? Why do you think Keiko wasn't?
Each animal has a different personality, and Keiko's personality was really unique. He was a very gentle animal. He could, these guys are so powerful. We're so small in their world, and they could hurt us so easily. And he wasn't. He was always very gentle. And I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the reason why. I think that's part of it. Sorry.
So here's a question from Laura, and it's interesting. Laura says she was one of those children who wrote letters back in the late 90s to try to make sure that Keiko got released. And her question is, what was the hardest aspect of rehabilitation? So I think we can both take a shot at that, and they'll be different. And if every one of our team members was here, we'd each
absolutely
to that. But one of the things that was really difficult, I think, was for the people. Caico, he did adapt to the environment. He really was comfortable. He met almost every challenge that was put in front of him, if you will. He got stronger. He was able to eat live fish and the like. But living in this kind of an environment over a long period of time, separated from family and the like, I think the stresses on the team and the pressure, because it was such an emotional part of our lives, where you were committed to this happening, no matter what, that he was going to go free, he was going to join a family and live forever, that you put that stress on yourselves. And so I think that led to everyone having lots of anxiety, if you will, about what to do. And so you get a bad weather day and you're having to choose between, do we do research? Do we do this? Do we do that? How do we fix a given problem? All of those pressures on the people, I think, were part of the effort, but they were not the reasons in any way that Keiko didn't join a pod. The problem and the difficulty is finding the pod that he is comfortable with and that accepts him, because he can't be released on his own. And that's why it's called reintroduction. So for me, that's the biggest challenge, is how do you find the connectivity that they find for themselves? How do you create the experience so they can connect? Because it's not about us. It's not about anything we do. It's about creating the opportunity, and they're able to make the best use of it, if you will. Jeff, what do you think was the toughest part?
I think the weather, but I agree, Charles, 100% with that. The staffing was tough. We were all like family there, and we had a very large family, and we had to count on each other. We had to watch each other's backs. It was very dangerous out there. When you're in those kind of conditions, you're out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's somebody on the bay pen with Caico, and those conditions are rough. So the stresses of working in a harsh environment, being away from your family, difficult weather, the darkness. That it just made it tough to get through those winters and finally get to the field season, and so we can get out there and do those walks again, which were so fun, and we learned so much from them, and it was such a neat thing to do. The weather for me was challenging, because you couldn't, you can't predict Mother Nature, and you don't know what she's going to throw at you at times, and sometimes it was more than we can handle.
Yeah. There's a question here. Did we record any of Keiko's vocalizations? Talk for a moment about how many we recorded. Hours and hours and hours.
We have days, months, years of that. We had tapes going all the time, so if a wild animal did come into the bay, we'd be able to pick it up. So we had tapes going 24 hours a day. So we have tons of vocalizations, and we worked with Dr. Bill Watkins from Woods Hole, and that was one of the things we were also trying to do, was trying to determine where Keiko's family was through vocalizations. And so we got as many vocalizations from the whales in the Iceland area as we could, and then tried to compare those to Keiko's vocalizations. And so that was a key component too. So again, a lot of these research things, there's a huge list of things that we accomplished in some of the things that we were trying to learn, and it just spoke about a few of them.
So here's another question from Sharon, actually in the UK. In hindsight, would you have rescued another cetacean, a dolphin or a beluga or an orca, as a companion animal for Caico? And I think the and's important, could that have helped him not be so resilient or reliant on people?
Absolutely.
What do you think, Jeff?
I think absolutely. I think, Caico wasn't the best candidate for trying to reintroduce back to the wild, but he was.
When we interrupted, Keiko was a movie star.
Yeah.
The reason he was the candidate was because he was Free Willy, not because he was the best candidate for reintroduction. It was because he captured the attention and the hearts and minds of people around the world. Sorry, Jeff, I couldn't resist.
No, but absolutely, if we had a companion animal with them, you bet. It's easier to do the live fish training when you have competition between the two animals. It's easier to do a lot of these things, like the physical conditioning, when you can do the competition with the animals. So having a solitary animal and that the only thing that he's fixated on is the person trying to talk to him, communicate to him in a language that he understands to get him to do something. But he doesn't have his other conspecifics. He doesn't have his own kind there. So they bond really closely to the people. And I think that was, again, part of the problem was Keiko was in this half world. He didn't know if he was, which world he needed to be in. And I think that was one of the challenges too. But if we had a companion animal, that would have been helpful. And even if he wasn't releasable, he would have a companion to be able to live out the rest of his life with. So yeah, a companion animal would be helpful.
So Jeff, let me ask you a question about that, because clearly if he wasn't reintroduced, having a companion animal and even looking for one, you and I spent lots of hours talking about this question while we were there. But in terms of reintroduction, if we'd had a companion animal with him and we were trying to find a pod for him to join and for them to welcome him, and there's a companion animal and we're working with two at the same time, what's the complication then of that reintroduction and the acceptance with a pod if there are two?
Yeah, well, maybe I should clarify that. If you released him with a dolphin, if we tried to release Keiko with a dolphin, that wouldn't be practical, and plus it wouldn't be fair for the dolphin because they're not found. Bottlenose dolphins aren't found in the North Atlantic. But if it was another conspecific, another killer whale, maybe. If it was the Icelandic killer whale, like Keiko, that was wild caught, Yeah, that would be a good candidate for a companion animal. But having a dolphin or another species with him, that that would complicate things, and again, it wouldn't be in the best interest, and probably it wouldn't be the best interest for the research community for sure. You don't want to bring in an animal that's out of habitat into a new environment like that, and it would be irresponsible to do that.
One of the other questions we've had is the equipment we had in Iceland still there? Is there anything going on in Klettsvik Bay? So one thing that's really good to mention is there is indeed, and there is a group with Merlin Entertainment. Merlin has some 50, 60 different kinds of parks, entertainment parks around the world. And they made a commitment a number of years ago not to keep any cetaceans in any of their parks. So we certainly applaud them for that decision years ago. And they bought a park a few years ago in Taiwan that had some belugas, had 3 belugas, one of whom died. And they made the decision to move these 2 belugas to a sanctuary they would create for them. And they selected Klettsvik Bay. And those 2 belugas, little gray and little white, are there now. They're not yet in the bay. They've been there about a year in a tank on shore, and they will be, from what we understand, and we talk to these folks regularly, moving them into Klettsvik Bay as a sanctuary this summer. So that's an example of a commitment from a park doing the right thing for their animals. Different from the way we're building a sanctuary generally for whales from captivity. They're not ours. We're looking to partner with marine parks and others that have whales and bring them to the sanctuary in Port Hilford. But there's an example of people who have made a determination, selected a spot, and have that for their whales. And it's a great story, and we look forward to the next chapter of it. So that's what's happening in Klettsvik Bay, and I hope they have good weather every day.
Yeah, good luck.
So some other questions. I'm just leaving. There are a lot of questions. We won't get to all of them, and I really apologize for that. But let's see here. So here's a question from someone of what academic degrees and what do we suggest for people who want to work in this field and work with sanctuaries? Jeff, what do you think the training is that works for this kind of work?
Well, there's a lot of different directions you can go with this. You can take an academic career and get a master's or PhD to be able to work with these animals. And another way to be able to do it is developing boat handling skills and to be able to spend time on the water and getting field experience on different projects. That's so important, especially in like projects like the Caico project. Our team that we put together was a young team, but they had the heart. And that was the thing that we were looking for with the Caico project, was having the heart, to have the people that were willing to watch each other's back. And you knew that if you got in trouble, that somebody was going to be there to help you. That was one of the things that we were looking for. But having that experience, either the education to do it or the practical experience and on the water, that's really important. There's a lot of ways you can do that, get that, get those skills, develop those skills.
It's really, we're in an hour, but there are more than 200 of you still with us, so we'll keep going for a few minutes and respond to some more questions. One of the things Jeff just said about what background do you need and the like, and I think he's right. That's a variety. There's so many skill sets that are needed in this area. In that picture of the team we showed at the beginning, there's Hadler Halsen. He was a well-known broadcaster and had political savvy, if you will, for dealing with the Icelandic government. He ran interference for us. He got things done within the country that we couldn't do on our own. So there's a skill you wouldn't even expect. But there's all the marine operations, there's the diving, there's the animal husbandry, of course, the marine biology. All of these kinds of skills are needed, but it is about commitment and desire. I mean, who would have thought I'd be sitting here doing this? I mean, it's, my background was political science gazillion years ago, but, we all find ourselves doing things, and it's because of the commitment and, as Jeff says, the heart. that allows us to keep doing it. So I think you have the heart, you'll find the skill set that you want to follow and that brings that heart to life. So,
yeah, certainly not doing it for the money. We're doing it for the passion and you know, for the animals.
So one of the questions Courtney asks, one of our advisors actually, Courtney Vale, is in hindsight, would we do anything different about Caico's rehabilitation and release?
That's a good
And of
question.
course, the answer to that is, of course we would. We know so much more. But I always like to think of questions like this as, would we have done something different with what we knew at the time, as opposed to what we knew today? And I think that changes the answer, because I think we were making the best decisions with the information and the people we had at the time, each time. That doesn't mean we didn't make mistakes every day. Of course we did. And we made the wrong decisions at times. But I think what we were doing was so unique at the time. And we had to bring people together. I mean, I remember conversations Jeff and I had probably in 1999, that first year of, okay, how do we really train Caico to be untrained? How do we untrain Caico? And Jeff's answer was, well, we need trainers to untrain Caico. I mean, that's, you know, get your arms around that. How does someone say something like that in a sentence? And that's what Jeff said to me. And we ended up then at that point bringing some additional people onto the team who had more behavioral training. And that was a challenge, because where do they come from? Well, they come from the captive industry. So, and they had skills that helped augment our animal care staff to create certain behaviors that helped on the open ocean walks. And that's a little counterintuitive. Now, we might have done certain things like that differently with the experience we have 20 years later. But Jeff, what do you think? What are some things you think of that you might have done differently?
I think you're so right. I mean, they are different, you know, different answers. And I think back then, I don't think there's anything we would have done differently. What we did was we'd start down a path, and, you know, if we hit a dead end, we'd try a different path. And so, and that was everything from live fish training to the boat walks to how we anchored the pen and dealing with the mad lift. There was just always something that, you know, we'd start down a path and thinking it's the right way to go. And then, nope, we're at a dead end here. And so we'd go down a different path to try to get him to the point where, you know, he was out there with the animals.
So I think one of the questions that someone's just asked here is good too. And that's, how do we create awareness? Is Jessica, how do we create awareness to raise funds at the level the world did for Caico? And I think one of the things that I do think about, and this goes back to Courtney's question, what would you do differently? We need to think about where we were. There was no social media in those days. We barely had cell phones. We had, I mean, Craig McCaw was he was our primary supporter, and he owned McCaw Cellular. He got us some international cell phones that were big phones like this you'd carry around, and they worked. But we didn't have that kind of communication. What's different today? Social media. And so if we can create a global effort to support the building of sanctuaries, not just ours, but sanctuaries, moving whales that are suffering psychological stress, are living in environments where they don't have the quality of life they should have, and they could thrive in sanctuaries. We need a global social media effort that does raise funds. This is not something that will happen for us or for anyone without expending the kind of money we did on the Caico project, which was literally tens of millions of dollars. And we need to spend the same. And these animals have raised millions of dollars for the people who hold them. They've entertained tens of millions of people. We owe them something back. And with this kind of a global effort, we can do it. will spend less on building a sanctuary than a marine park would spend building the next small concrete tank. That's a trade-off that we should make every day. And we can. So I appreciate the question. Go to our website, help out, send your friends, do social media, because Jeff and I don't know how. And so you need to do that and help us out and do it. Another question, there's a lot of questions here about Lolita, and the Lummi tribe, of course, call her now Shakitena. Oh, where do we need to do it? I can usually do this. Shakti, go ahead, Jeff. What's her name?
Scully Taktanat.
Scully Taktana is the Lummi name, and they believe, of course, in their tribal tradition, that the orca are their ancestors and that she is a member of their family. So they have now started an effort. There have been efforts. Howie Garrett has done more than any other person probably to help bring Lolita, Scully Taktana, back to the Pacific Northwest, back to the Salish Sea. The Lummi are now heavily involved in that effort. And because of their commitment as a tribal nation, a First Nation, to bringing her back, they may have the best chance of anyone to do so. So they are actively engaged in this. There is some legal action taking place to help that along. And certainly Jeff and our team are helping with the Lummi in every way on transport, on all of the operational sides of what would be needed to make that happen. And there is the potential for a place for her to go back. And as Jeff said earlier, unlike Keiko and unlike, frankly, all of the orca in captivity, except for her and Corky, those are the two whose families we know and we know where to find.
Yep.
So in that context, from a familial standpoint, they are the best candidates. They're both also over 50 years old. So making sure that the health assessments are done, and what's done is in the best interests of the health and welfare of each of them and of their families, because their families could want to spend time taking care of her, and they may not be able to have her keep up with them for feeding and the like. So all of those are challenges to come, but there's terrific work going on right now to see if she can be brought back to the Salish Sea. And I know that there have been a number of questions about that. So I'm looking for a couple of last questions before we have to end. A lot of questions about what we do differently. I think I've seen and answered that one. A lot of thanks. We appreciate that. Thank you all for thanking us. One question, what can we do to support the release of these beautiful creatures into the wild, into the sanctuary, or into a sanctuary? This is from Joanne. And we've touched on it, but I think it's being involved. It is speaking for yourself, getting your friends involved in this. It is a movement. It's, people call it the Blackfish effect. People have seen the movie Blackfish and out of that have heard about it, but it's more than that. I think people, and particularly children, who started the Caico project in many respects? A lot of people did, but children were an amazing element in bringing it to reality with all those letters, all those postcards, gave us all conscience, if you will. And then a big article in Time magazine that called attention to their letters and concerns, funding from the Humane Society of the US, funding from Craig McCaw and from Warner Brothers, getting all that started. So a lot of people involved. But children seem to understand right away that animals need to be given respect, and they automatically do that. And then we teach them other things about how we can dominate animals in parks or what have you. So we need to help children be involved in this. We need to turn this over to them and do what they say, but getting everyone involved in this. And I do, please go to thewhalesanctuary.org, see what we're doing. Last year, we were instrumental in helping the Russian activists release almost 100 whales that had been illegally captured in Russia, and were going to be sold to parks in China. And we played a small part in helping the government make the decision to release or force the release of those animals. But everyone needs to be involved. Jeff, what do you think? What can people do to help?
I think that's just get involved, get involved, get out there, talk to the politicians and just, try to raise awareness. And like you say, it starts with the kids, and get the movement going. It was like with the Caico project and other projects I've been involved with, the name recognition was so important. If you just have a killer whale out there, people didn't associate it with it. But once you put the name on it and people start developing a relationship with that animal, they'll do more for that animal. And I think that's so important.
So another question here as to how does the weather in the sanctuary site in Nova Scotia that we've selected differ from the weather in Iceland? Night and day. That's how it differs. There's absolutely no comparison. I mean, the weather I'm in Southern California today, so the weather in Nova Scotia can be challenging and it can be cold and the like, but it's nothing like what the regular weather was in Iceland. Bad storm's a bad storm anywhere. And you button down the hatches, if you will, you move into areas where there's some kind of shelter. And the bay in Port Hilford lends us the ability to be able to shelter when we need to. But the regular winter weather and the storms that come in are very different. The worst storm may be the same, but the day-to-day weather is completely different. And again, part of our criteria in selecting a site for a sanctuary was to look at weather, to look at all the environmental elements of the bay, to look at depth, to look at size. We're looking at 100 acres of water space for the sanctuary in Port Hilford, 300 times the size of the largest performance tank in any captive facility. So big space, reasonably protected, with a community that supports us, fishermen that are already doing work with us on a daily basis. So I think it's a very different environment and the like. So I don't see that as a problem. Jeff, you seeing any other questions here?
I'm not as familiar with this as you are.
Okay, I'm spinning down them. One question is, do we think he was too old for this project? Was Keiko too old for the project? I don't think so. I mean, for a wild whale, Jeff, talk about the age of some of these whales.
Yeah, that's another really good question. A lot of really good questions. This one, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. A younger animal is going to be more adaptive to its surroundings. Older animal is going to be a little more cautious. So that worked against us, but he was also big enough and old enough to understand more. And I think that worked for us too. So he wasn't our choice. He was the oldest animal, male in captivity at the time. Still, even at that time, we were still trying to figure out how long they lived, back 25 years ago. So now we know more, and I would say that he was a good age. 20 is not old for a wild killer whale. So, and that's the same thing with Lolita. She's older, but she is her mom's still out there. These animals live to close to 100. She could have a lot more years ahead of her.
Well, it's now we've run kind of about 15 minutes beyond the time, and I know we have not answered everyone's questions. Please feel free to email us. You can find us at the Whale Sanctuary Project website. You can email questions there. We welcome all of you to get involved with us in every way. There was a question I noticed, will there be internships at the sanctuary when it's open? Of course there will. We're looking to have a major educational element to the sanctuary. So there's all of what we're doing is certainly written about and shows on our social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on our website, whalesanctuary.org. And also we're doing webinars almost weekly on a number of different subjects. Our president and founder, Dr. Lori Marino, has done a number of webinars and Facebook events around her work on the neurobiology, if you will. She's a neuroscientist on the brains of whales and on how they're affected by stress in captivity. There are a number of different things that are happening. So I hope you'll all continue to tune in with us, if we can use that kind of a word on Zoom, and that you'll ask your questions, stay with us, challenge us in every way. And I just want to repeat what I said at the beginning. This is just Jeff and I having a conversation. Could have been any one of the team members or any 2 or 3 or 5. It took a huge group of people to do this project with Caico. Everyone brought their best to it, and we all did the best we could. And it was a remarkably special time in our lives. So
Really?
Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining with us. And I hope you'll follow us on the whalesanctuary.org.
Thank you for supporting us, and stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye-bye.